Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it.
Starting this episode with a small content warning because this episode is about a movie that's about the Holocaust. So we talk extensively about the Holocaust, and it might be a little shocking.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are talking about a movie called Son of Saul that came out in 2015. It was directed by László Nemes and co-written by Nemes and Clara Royer. It was the winner of the Academy Award and Golden Globe for Best Foreign Language Film. It's largely in Hungarian. It was also the winner of the Grand Prix at Cannes. The film takes us through about 36 hours in the life of a fictional member of a Sonderkommando at Auschwitz concentration camp during World War II. The Sonderkommando were work units made up of mainly Jewish prisoners who were forced to participate in the disposal of gas chamber victims. What did you think of this movie?
I have many thoughts about this movie. I thought it was really good, but I also wish I hadn't seen it. So I don't know what that tells you, but what it probably tells you is that it's not a fun Saturday night popcorn movie. It's a very serious and also very tastefully made movie about the Holocaust. Some artistic choices were made in this that are really interesting because they immediately and very directly affect the storytelling in the movie. Yeah. I thought it was really good. How about you?
Yeah, it's a really well-made movie. We'll talk more about this, but the perspective that you get is very narrow. So they deliberately focus on the perspective of the main character. So you get a lot of close-ups of his face, you get a lot of his immediate surroundings, but all of the really brutal, horrific elements of the Holocaust, we really only see in periphery. They're blurred in the background or they're just off screen. And so we're really getting the sense of this character who lives in this world that is claustrophobically small, and he's numbed to everything that's going on around him. For survival, he has to keep his head down and focus on just what's right in front of him. So that's what we as the audience are getting too. And it's extremely effective as a way to tell a story. We get tons of this rich sound landscape going on that we can't really see what's happening, but there are people speaking 8 different languages off screen, shouting, gunfire, you name it. And so there's this kind of confusion and panic the whole time that we don't really know what's happening, but you get the sense that that's what it would be like if you were there. And the character is trying not to get sucked into all of that. He's kind of just putting one foot in front of the other, and his world has narrowed to his own survival. And the way they have made this movie is just brilliantly done. I think that was worried going into it that this movie would be a little bit of a grind. If I'm honest, I was worried it was just going to be crushingly sad. And there is that element to it, but also there are these two main plot lines. So we have the main character who his immediate kind of spiritual pilgrimage quest, I guess, as it were, is to bury the body of this person that he thinks is his son. And then meanwhile, around him, there's this other plot that's going on of some of the other prisoners plotting an uprising against the SS guards. And so both of these things feel very urgent. They feel very human. They feel very important to the characters. And so because of that, I don't think the movie kind of falls into this like tragedy porn, and I just think it's really beautifully done. It's worth mentioning that the filmmaker, like the writer director, is Jewish. The main actor is Jewish. They are descended from Holocaust survivors, and I'm not Jewish myself, but I did read some reviews from Jewish journalists and film reviewers, and it seems like they hit the right note, I guess. So yeah, just a super super well done movie.
Not to get too technical, but they filmed the entire movie using a 40mm lens, which is what gives you that depth of field where the foreground is super sharp and everything in the background is blurry to the point where you can no longer recognize any details. You can just sort of see shapes of things. But the way they do it is you know exactly what is going on despite the fact that you can't see it. So it's really cleverly done. And I feel like not enough people have seen this film. You should definitely all watch it.
Yeah, I definitely would recommend it too. It's super powerful, and if you're going to watch a movie about the Holocaust, I would say this is probably the best one that I've seen.
I've seen a couple. I don't remember all of them because some of them I've seen a long time ago. I'm sure if I watch them again, I'll remember having seen them. But it's definitely the most human one. It's not Hollywood. It doesn't look pretty. It looks disgusting, as it was in Auschwitz. Yeah, go watch it, everyone, and then come back and listen. So let's get into the plot. We first get an opening card which explains the word, I'll quote this now, Sonderkommando, German word. Term used in a concentration camp to designate prisoners of special status, also called secret carriers. The members of the Sonderkommando are separated from the rest of the camp. They are killed after a few months of work.
Yeah, so these are guys who they would show up at Auschwitz on the trains with everyone else, and then they would be chosen largely for their physical ability to do hard labor, and then they would be separated from the rest, and not only were they forced to transport the bodies for cremation, but they also cleaned the gas chambers, removed the clothes from the changing rooms, they would remove gold teeth and other valuables to turn over to the Nazis, and once the bodies had been burned in the crematorium, they would dispose of the ashes afterward. So, yeah, a pretty grisly task. They had their own barracks with slightly better living conditions than the rest of the camp, and sometimes the Nazis would turn a blind eye if they kept food and clothing from gas chamber victims. But as you can imagine, the psychological trauma was extremely intense. This was a job that even the SS guards didn't want to do because it was too distasteful. It's really impossible for us to imagine what this situation was like. And of course, the threat of death was ever present as well because it was well known that the Nazis would not want to leave behind any loose ends or witnesses to what they were doing.
And they were also, like, even though they had special privileges and they had better barracks and water and food sometimes, it was still hard labor. So these men were still skinny and hungry, and not to mention, as some already said, if you have to do that work, you're not going to be able to do it for very long. And you can kind of see it in the main character, especially. You can see him almost disassociating from the very first scene, and we don't know how long he's been doing this job as the movie starts, but you can tell it's been a while, I think.
5 Sonderkommando members wrote and buried messages bearing witness to what was happening, most of which were found after the camp was liberated in 1945. And these are known as the Scrolls of Auschwitz. They're kept in a museum now. We still have them. These were Nemesh's initial inspiration to write a movie on this topic. And of the almost 2,000 inmates who were forced to be members of the Sonderkommando at Auschwitz, just over 100 of them survived the camps. So a brutal short lifespan once you were chosen for that particular work detail. I didn't get a chance to pick up the book We Wept Without Tears: Testimonies of the Jewish Sonderkommando from Auschwitz, which is a book by Gideon Greif, and it's based on interviews with surviving members of the Sonderkommando after the war. But I did read a couple of interviews with him, and he had some quotes that I think may be relevant. Here's one from Heinrich Mendelbaum, who was a Polish Holocaust survivor and a prisoner on an Auschwitz-Birkenau Sonderkommando. And he was asked if he remembers the first person that he threw into the crematorium pit. And he said, "Oh, yes, he is here beside me, a man in his 50s whose body had been lying in the sun for a long time and was partially decomposing. I grabbed his hand to drag him into the pit, and the skin stuck to my hand like a glove. And I then asked myself, should I do it or not? And I realized that if I said no, I would be in flames in a moment, and the person who takes my place will do the job. And if not him, then the 10th or maybe the 100th person. But someone will do the job because people want to live. People want to live. The refusal, saying no in this situation, will not change a thing." And I think you really get a sense from that quote of the real sense of guilt and shame a lot of these people experience for the work that the Nazis forced them to do.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say about any of this, but that's just because it is so horrifying to try to put yourself in those shoes. Like, I can't do it.
It's October of 1944, and we encounter our main character. His name is Saul Auslander, and he's played by Geisha Rohrig. Him and his fellow members of the Sonderkommando greet trains of Jewish prisoners who are arriving at Auschwitz. These are prisoners who are destined for the gas chambers. And so Saul and his fellow members of the Sonderkommando are kind of guiding these people inside, and it'll be their responsibility to take their clothes away after the people have gone into the gas chambers. This is when we first start seeing this really tight perspective on Saul. We're not really seeing these people specifically around him, but we can kind of get a sense of them in his periphery and we can hear them.
Yeah, I thought it was quite touching because he also helps them undress, and it's so gentle. And obviously, these people have no idea because we also hear the SS telling them to remember on which hook their clothes are because they'll be getting them back and there'll be soup afterwards, so they have to hurry up. And it's such a terrible, dreadful thing to listen to because we know now obviously what happens, and these people were scared, and he helps them undress, and I thought that was really moving, even though he also knows what happens to them, but he has no choice.
Yeah, I was reading one interview with a prisoner who was forced to be on the Sonderkommando, and he was talking about how sometimes one of your greatest fears when you were doing that job is that you would see someone that you knew, like a loved one or someone from your community. And he was talking about how he did see some of his cousins at one point, and they asked him, he's like, "Did you say anything?" And he's like, "No, because there's nothing that I can do about it, and I didn't want them to panic, and I didn't want them to be afraid." Just that whole situation is unbelievable.
I think the only thing you can do is just live in the present. There's no yesterday, there's no tomorrow, there's just now and the task you have to do, like, that's all you can do. If you don't do it, you will die, and someone else will do it, like the quote said. Like, there's just gonna be another one. So it doesn't matter. We see Saul, and he seems kind of numb to what's going on around him because we see the people go into the gas chamber, and then afterwards they have to clean the gas chamber, and then they have to sort through their clothes and drag the bodies away. So he seems numb, but that changes when he sees a Jewish boy who initially survives the gas, and he keeps watching. And the boy doesn't live for very long. He's murdered by the SS doctor. And he keeps looking, and then suddenly he is convinced that this boy is his son, and it becomes his mission to see the boy buried properly rather than be burned and shuffled into a mass grave. So he looks for this boy's passport in the possessions of the Jewish people, and we can't see if he finds it or not. But it's, you know, immediately that that's what he's thinking. And also, I think for me, I had a feeling this is not his son, this is a boy, and this is a way for him to continue living and to keep going and to just be able to do something other than the horror that he's been doing and to remain human a little bit.
Yeah, because of all of the bodies that he's dragged away for disposal, he couldn't do anything to avoid doing that or change what had happened, but maybe he can bury this one body and get some sense of redemption out of it. Saul pleads with this doctor called Miklos Nishli, played by Sandor Zoter. He's a Jewish doctor who's also a prisoner, but it's kind of odd. So he works as a forensic doctor under the notorious Yosef Mengele, who is known as the Angel of Death, who performed many completely unethical experiments at Auschwitz. It's odd because, yes, this man is a prisoner, but he's also almost a colleague of Mengele's. He's being forced to do this work, but I don't know. It's this very strange vibe. So Saul pleads with this man not to perform an autopsy on the boy. Dr. Nishley refuses, but he agrees to give Saul 5 minutes alone with the body later that evening. And Nishley was a real person. He was forced by Mangala to assist with human experimentation both before and after prisoners' deaths. He survived the war and published a book. There's a 2001 movie called The Gray Zone that's based on it, but there are some inconsistencies in his firsthand accounts. There's a sense that he perhaps tried to make himself come off better than he should have. And he did end up testifying at Nuremberg, but he later left medicine entirely. So just definitely um, a character who exists in this kind of gray area.
I like that they do this where the main character's story is fictional, but a lot of what's going on around him is not fictional, or at least it's based on something that happened in real life. Like this guy, and also the revolution that's gonna happen later. It makes it really effective because he's sort of on the outside of all of it. It's happening around him, but he's not trying to be a part of it. He's made a part of it by the situation, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, me too. Also, a minor thing that might cheer you up is that though Josef Mengele did escape to Argentina and was never held formally accountable for his crimes, he had a stroke while swimming and slowly drowned. You know, sounds like a terrible death. And sometimes karma does, exact its pound of flesh.
Yes. So next goes to Rabbi Frankel, played by Jerzy Welczek, and asks him to help him perform a secret funeral ritual. But the rabbi refuses. And given everything that's happening around them, it's not hard to see why the rabbi would not go along with his request. It's all pretty chaotic.
Yeah, the rabbi is just kind of incredulous at this request. He's like, "Well, I said the Kaddish, but there's no way that we can bury this body. Like, look at what's happening around us, dude. Like, we haven't been able to bury a body yet. Like, what makes you think that this is going to be the time?" And obviously, this single solitary mission that Saul is undertaking is not. It almost comes across a bit ludicrous to the people around him because they're like, "Dude, you know, we're focused on survival here. This is not a priority for us."
Right. What are you doing?
Saul hears a discussion between Abraham Wojcicki, played by Levente Molnar, and the Oberkapo Biederman, played by Urs Reffen. And they're discussing an uprising within the Sonderkommando. He doesn't really want to be involved, but it's kind of a recurring theme in this movie that he keeps getting sucked into this, even though he has his own personal quest that he's trying to undertake. And so he offers them his locksmithing skills in exchange for the opportunity to track down another rabbi in one of the other Sonderkommando units because he's still determined he's going to find a rabbi to do this funeral service. And Saul ends up helping the rebels to narrowly avoid discovery as they attempt to photograph the horrific happenings at the camp. And this part is based on real events. The Sonderkommando photographs are 4 blurred photographs taken secretly at the gas chambers at Auschwitz-Birkenau in August of 1944, along with a few photographs in the so-called Auschwitz album, which was taken by the Nazis. These are the only photographs known to exist of events that happened around the gas chambers. They were taken by a Jewish prisoner at great personal risk, as you can imagine, because the SS did not want there to be evidence of what was happening, and smuggled out of the camp by the Polish resistance.
Yeah. And we just heard the name Oberkapo Biederman, and in case you don't know what a capo is, a capo is a prisoner of quote-unquote higher rank, and he's often put in charge of other prisoners, so most of the time they would be overseeing hard labor, but sometimes they would also be given administrative jobs, and they would have better accommodation, more food, and less beatings from the SS guards. But they were hated throughout the camps generally, and there are records of capos being lynched by other prisoners as the camps were being liberated. So these people are really not popular within the camps, even though they very often were coerced to do it. Some of them really did think it was a way to escape, but I find it really difficult to say these were bad people, but they did beat other prisoners. It's like a him or me situation where they were just as mean as the SS guards. They wouldn't kill prisoners, but they would still mistreat them pretty badly.
I think the SS were masterminds at pitting people against each other and making it as difficult as possible for people to collaborate with one another in order to potentially rise up against these group of assholes running the camp. I think that any opportunity they had to force a prisoner to become complicit in some ways or to at least feel complicit in some ways, then they would do that.
Saul goes to look for another rabbi he's in another Sonderkommandos group, and this rabbi, at first I thought he didn't necessarily understand him, which might also have been the case, but he's played by Martin Eck, and he refuses to help Saul, and at first he nearly drowns and Saul saves him, which is relevant because it'll come back later. And after a brief altercation, the rabbi is then killed by the SS guard, and Saul is returned to his unit. So it's another defeat in his quest where there's another rabbi that doesn't want to help him.
Yeah. And that night, Saul has a brief run in with Mangala himself, played by Hellas Andras, but is able to recover his son's body and hide it before the doctors can, well, call it autopsy it, but in their minds, they're thinking of it as dissecting it. He gets pulled into more resistance activities again before he can do more to get this body buried. Biederman, that's our capo, he knows that his unit will soon be killed because he gets told to make a list of 70 men that he can do without, very ominously. So, knowing this, he has Saul go to the women's camp to get a package of gunpowder.
Yeah, the scene where Saul tries to bury his son's body in like the middle of a thing. I'm like, how is this guy not getting caught in trying to do this thing? Like he keeps narrowly escaping. But also the scene with Mengele and the other SS guy just dancing around him made me so sad.
They're mocking him and teasing him, and he's just standing there. This is not far and away not the worst thing that the Nazis have tried to do to him, but it's just, it's one more stone kind of thing that they're throwing at him.
Yeah, and I noticed you just used the word dissecting, and the language used by the SS guys in this movie is very shocking. Like they call the bodies of the people they've killed the pieces. Some of the dialogue is probably more shocking than the stuff that you see.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it was just my subtitles because the subtitles that I had were not great, but the Jewish doctor who is working with Mangala refers to Saul talks about the body of the boy as he, and then the doctor refers to it as it. I just, even that small little speech adjustment just tells you so much.
I can't remember if it was like that for me, but I wouldn't be surprised.
So in this part, we're starting to learn a little more about this uprising that's in the works, and of course, Saul has to go to the women's camp to get a package of gunpowder. I can't remember if they identify immediately that that's what it is, but he's going to get some kind of package anyway. And women prisoners in real life working in an explosives factory at Auschwitz would smuggle tiny amounts of explosives in these double bottom food containers each day, and they would bring them to the resistance. And then the resistance would use these little bits of gunpowder to make homemade grenades, effectively. And four women, a group led by Polish Jew Rosia Robota, were hanged for their role in the Sonderkommando uprising in October of 1944. They were tortured but never gave up their co-conspirators, and Robota was only 23 years old.
Saul doesn't even want to go to the women's camp. He keeps saying, I don't want to do it. But they keep saying,
Well,
you can go because you know her.
yeah, it's a distraction from what he considers to be his primary quest, which is getting his body buried.
Right, yes. So he does go over to the women's camp where he meets Ella, played by Julie Jacob, and she seems to know him, but he does not acknowledge her whatsoever because she keeps looking him in the eyes and he's not even properly looking at her. And she does give him the package. And on his return to his part of the camp, he is searching for another rabbi amongst new prisoners, but he's almost shot and he loses the gunpowder in the process because he undresses and gives his jacket, identifying him as a Sonderkommando man, to the rabbi to save him. But in doing so, loses the package. So that's not good.
Yeah. The scene where he meets Ella and she knows his name and she grabs his hand and he pulls his hand away. You really get this sense that he, in his mind, has had to, like you were saying earlier, really focus solely on the present and erase the life of the person that he was before. Because if he acknowledges who he was, then he has to kind of let all of those feelings in.
Yeah, that's a good one. That might be why he reacts like that. Because she even calls out his name and he just doesn't respond. And it's interesting because I don't know if I understand how he was allowed to go to the women's camp in the first place. I don't know if they bribed someone. Maybe I missed it.
I think it was bribery related.
Yeah,
And then the guard makes a joke about, "Oh, you're quick," as if he had bribed his way over there so he could have sex with this woman.
poor guy. Poor woman, too. And you can also see the women capo, and she's not much nicer to the women in there than the men are to the male prisoners.
I was happy to see that they acknowledged the role that the women played in the uprising. It was nice to get that brief little scene for sure.
Yes.
Saul, he finds this man who claims to be a rabbi whose name is Brown. He's played by Todd Charmont. This is the guy that he has rescued from being shot and thrown into a pit. He sneaks him into the camp. Abraham, by this point, that's Saul's friend who's been working on the uprising. He's had enough of these shenanigans. They have this whole little conversation where we as the audience have it confirmed for the first time that this boy, this corpse, is probably not even Saul's son.
Yeah. They keep saying, "You don't have a son." And then he says something along the lines of, "But he's not from my wife." So he tries to make it seem like it's like an affair or something that he's had. But I think we as an audience know that he doesn't have a son. It's just a coping mechanism for him to keep going.
Yeah, definitely the vibe for sure.
Upon arriving at work, Abraham and the others discover that Biederman and his unit, so at work is it at the gas chambers, that Biederman and his unit have been killed because they find their clothes. And they're like, "This is Biederman's." And that's when the prisoner revolt begins. I don't know if it's not planned, it just happens like in the moment because there's like fighting and then they're all running away and a lot of them are getting shot. But Saul manages to get out of there and he flees to the woods, carrying the body of the boy that he stashed somewhere outside and manages to pick up. For me, this was the most tense part of the movie because everything else just kind of happens, but here Saul has to keep from being shot and you're with him the entire time, so you feel like you're actually hiding behind like the carts that they're using to get out of there, and it's pretty intense.
Yeah. In real life, there had been an uprising in the works for some time in the camp, and they were coordinating a little bit with the Polish resistance, but it kept getting pushed back, and then it had been canceled. And then on October 7th, 1944, some of the Jewish Sonderkommando prisoners learned that the Germans planned to kill them soon, and it became a now or never type of situation, similar to how we see it in the movie. So they attacked the SS with what they had, these makeshift weapons. They managed to kill 3 SS officers. They also destroyed one of the crematoria. Some people were able to escape. Most of them were soon caught. 452 of them were killed. A goodly number of these, the Nazis made them lay face down on the ground and then just walked along, shooting them in the head. By all accounts, not a good result, but it was, really symbolic of this resistance and the fact that the human spirit never went out. And the Nazis actually stopped using the crematoria after that. And they ended up destroying the rest of them as they left the camp in 1945 as a way of trying to dispose of the evidence. And there was also a Sonderkommando revolt at Treblinka in August of 1943. So this was certainly not the only time when this group of prisoners decided that they'd had enough. Prisoners looted the camp arsenal with a key that they had forged, and they engaged in a 30-minute gun battle with the SS guards. Roughly 100 of them got away, helped by the Polish resistance, though the SS murdered hundreds of others.
I do feel like in the movie they get a little bit more help than they might have gotten in real life because they do have real weapons, I think. Because they keep talking about the weapons that they're getting from the resistance. We don't see them getting the weapons, but they do have it. And the package that Saul was meant to retrieve and take back was meant to blow up one of the crematoria, I think, but that obviously doesn't happen because they don't have it anymore. But it did happen in real life, so that's a little nod to that, I'm sure.
In real life, what had happened was that the crew of these 2 crematoria were the ones who realized that they were going to be killed. So they were the ones who sort of spontaneously started the uprising. And then the groups in the other crematoria didn't fully know what was going on. Some of them didn't participate because they didn't realize what was happening. And so one crematorium was burned down, but they had plans for the other ones as well. But it just, because of the way that it was initiated, it wasn't quite as organized as it perhaps could have been.
No, that makes sense. I mean, sometimes it's so hard to imagine that with the amount of people in the camps, that the ability to escape from those camps wasn't there. But then they didn't have any weapons, they were starved, they were sick, there were a lot of diseases in the camps too, so people were dying left and right. And being caged like that in the way that the SS kept them is so dehumanizing that I think you're no longer able to resist as much as you'd want to in a normal situation. So I think about that a lot. Like there are so many people in the camps. How come they didn't successfully manage to overpower the SS? But I think that thought doesn't make any sense because the camps were just horrible.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you like you said, you don't have any weapons, you
Yeah.
don't have a machine gun. You're living in a situation where you've been threatened with death every day for weeks or months or years,
Mm.
and you're just completely living without dignity. All you can think about is where your next meal is coming from, survival. I mean, it's difficult when you're in that situation to even imagine that you could organize some kind of grand plan. And the fact that some people still manage to do it, these two different Sonderkommando revolts, is really a testament to the resilience of those people, I think.
Yes.
Brown turns out to be a fraud. We, as the audience, knew that he wasn't a rabbi, but Saul was willing to overlook the signs because he was so desperate to find someone that could do a funeral service for this boy that he's been carrying around. With the Nazis on their heels, Saul and a bunch of the others, they go into the river. Saul loses his grip on the body as he flees into the water, and he's rescued by Rabbi Frankel. And it's sort of the reverse of that scene earlier where he had rescued the other rabbi from the water.
Yeah. I wondered when I was watching the scene where he's drowning effectively. It feels to me like that was a purposeful thing, like he didn't want to go anymore, like he just wanted to, because he'd failed his mission, he'd lost his son, and he didn't look to be super weak. So that was a thing, right? Too. If you've been locked up in a concentration camp, in a death camp for so long, if the only thing that's in your future is death, it becomes hard to keep living. I don't know if that was meant to be that, but it did feel like he was just giving up on life in the river, and it's the rabbi who goes and saves him.
Well, you're robbed of all human connection too, right? Like, if
Right.
this guy had a family before, he doesn't have them now. He's completely isolated on this one side of the camp with a bunch of men that he didn't know before he came to the camp. And now they're in this context together where it's virtually impossible to develop deep bonds with other people because you are so focused on your own survival and you don't know what's coming around the corner. And then as he's in the river, he loses his grip on the only human connection that in his mind that he has left, right? The body of this boy that he thinks is his son.
Yeah. But Rabbi Franco kind of drags him along. They make it to the other side of the lake, and they walk through the woods or run through the woods, and they take what they say is going to be a 5-minute break in a shed where they kind of sit down to discuss their options. And we are seeing the outside of the barn from Saul's point of view, and in the doorway of the barn appears a young boy, and he's a young Polish local, and he's looking at them kind of shocked. And we turn back to Saul and we see him slowly smile. And the boy then runs away, and with that, the camera also goes away from Saul. Like, we lose Saul's perspective, and we stay on the boy. He gets shooed away by the SS that is approaching. And the boy runs away, and then in the distance we hear gunfire, and we know that the prisoners are killed. And I thought this was a really, really striking final scene, but it also made me sad, not because they died, because that's obviously sad, but also Saul, because to me, I don't know if that was meant to be what I'm supposed to read from that scene, but I'm thinking he sees another little boy and this little boy's alive. So for me, it was like he saw another mission, but then obviously he never gets to go anywhere. But it's almost a little hopeful ending for Soul at least. And then the boy
Yeah.
is the one who got away and who gets to tell what he saw to people if he wants. So their stories will be told.
Yeah, it's the only time we see Saul smile in the whole movie. So it's very
Yeah.
noticeable.
I feel out of breath like I did watching the movie. I will say, I watched the movie in two parts because I couldn't manage to watch it in one go late at night. I needed to not go to sleep with that in my head. And I also watched it on fairly low volume because the sound is what makes the film effective, but it's also, it kind of pierces your soul a little bit because you hear all the horror and also all the regular talk makes it almost worse because these are just people trying to live another day and they're having a normal conversation and that makes it worse.
There's really something too about the fact that there's no background music and these voices that we're hearing speaking and shouting to one another in this cacophony of sound. I mean, we don't understand what they're saying, but if you were in this situation and you only spoke one or two languages, it really just would present this like confusing aura of sound around you. So I thought that was hugely effective.
Yeah, if I only had to watch one movie about the Holocaust, it would probably be this one. It is so effective because it is so small, too, because it's so narrow and it's so incredibly human because of it. There's no Hollywood in this whatsoever, and you can tell.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I don't think we have any extra notes, but I do have a book recommendation that I'm just gonna rattle off here. Because I read maybe almost half a year ago, I think now, a book called Man's Search Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. And Viktor E. Frankl was a psychiatrist from Vienna and was in two concentration camps, one of which being Auschwitz. And he wrote about his experiences, but he wrote about them from a psychiatrist's point of view. So he wrote about the common man in Auschwitz and what people do to survive in Auschwitz. And I would highly recommend you read it. It's a very short book, so if you're like me and have trouble reading a book, this one would be good. There's a second part in the book, I think it's about a third, which is about his theory for psychoanalysis. It's a bit scientific. I wasn't into it, but I'm sure it's interesting because it came from what he saw in Auschwitz. He was, like I said, in two concentration camps, and in the first one, he was often giving speeches about survival and hope and the mind. And in Auschwitz, he was actually ordered by the SS to set up his own clinic within Auschwitz. So he did talk to a lot of people about suicide and trying to keep them from committing suicide. So it's a very interesting book to read, and it gave me chills when I read it. I don't remember the specifics because that's just what my brain is like, but I would read it if I were you. I think it's pretty famous, actually. I think many people have read this book.
Nice. Good rec. I'll have to check it out.
You listen to a podcast, right?
I did listen to a podcast. Yeah, I'll recommend that too. It's the Holocaust History Podcast, and they had an episode called the Auschwitz Sonderkommando, and they interviewed this guy who was the assistant professor of history at Northumbria University, and his studies have focused on the Holocaust. It's a very informative interview if you want more details about the Sonderkommando. There are lots of myths that have risen up around them. Part of it is due to the fact that so few of them survived. A lot of falsehoods that have been passed down over the years, like this idea that they gave prisoners soap and towels before they went into the quote unquote showers, the idea that the gas came out of the shower heads themselves, like all these little details about the Holocaust that actually aren't true. A lot of these myths and falsehoods around what the Sonderkommando were doing comes from books like Dr. Nischle's books. And like as we spoke about him earlier in the movie, there are some inconsistencies in his accounts, and a lot of these myths and stories were allowed to be propagated because so few of the Sonderkommando members survived. And so this interview delves into some of those ideas or misconceptions that people had about the Sonderkommando and sets them straight.
Great. Before we get to rating this movie, because we do need to rate this movie, you can follow us wherever you get your podcasts, like on Spotify or Apple or Amazon or whatever, or one of the smaller podcast platforms, which I highly recommend. And you can rate us 5 stars and you can leave us a review. usually would give you something quirky right now, but I don't think this is a movie to be quirky about. But you can send this episode to a friend if they deserve a good movie about the Holocaust that isn't romanticized by Hollywood. This would be the one. We have to rate this movie, and we're gonna rate it Prisoner Revolutions out of 10. And you can go first this time.
I'm gonna rate this movie I'm gonna give it a 9.5 Prisoner Revolutions out of 10, which may be one of the highest ratings I've ever given. I think you gotta watch it. If you're worried that you're gonna sit down and it's just going to be heart-wrenchingly sad, that is a factor, but it's just such a beautifully well-made movie, articulates all these little complicated, nuanced things about the human spirit so well. I think it's well written. The dialogue is very spare, but what you do get is powerful. It's really well acted. The main actor hadn't acted in anything in many years before he was in this movie. It doesn't even feel acted. It just feels just very like raw and emotional. It's a really great film. It's I think, well, like I said at the beginning, probably the best film that I would recommend in this genre if I were to make that recommendation. What about you?
I think I'll rate it 8 Prisoner Revolutions out of 10. I also thought it was good, and it's muted in a way that I appreciate. There's no glamour because there wasn't any glamour, and the reason I'm not rating it higher is just because it's a genre that I find really difficult to deal with, so it has nothing to do with the movie itself because it's brilliant. In the beginning, when I started watching, I wasn't sure if I was gonna be able to stomach it because in the beginning it's quite difficult to be in the gas chambers with Saul. I found that really difficult to watch. And this kind of makes me a little sad because I want to say I almost got used to it a little bit by the end of the movie, which I don't know what that says about human beings, but if you're just exposed to horror that much, do you ever get used to it? Do you kind of tune it out? It made me think about that, and I love a movie that makes me think. So, high rating, not as high as Sam's, but that's only because I'm a wuss and I can't watch this stuff very well. But yes, if I had to watch only one, I would watch this one in this genre. So, highly recommend you give it a watch.
Are you reading anything?
I'm not reading anything new, so maybe I'll bounce back that question. Are you reading anything?
I'm just finishing up a war memoir by a Canadian author named Farley Mowat. He's pretty famous. If you're Canadian, you probably have heard of him. And it's about his experiences in World War II. He was part of the invasion force that landed on the beach at Sicily at Operation Husky, and then fought all through the Italian campaign. And the dedication in his book reads, "For Claire and Helen, and for all those others who endured the aftermath." And I just think there's something really poignant about that, and you know, reading his book, obviously a guy with a sense of humor. It's a really well-written book because this guy, he wrote a number of novels and that kind of stuff, but also he's so honest about his fear and what it was like to be there. And I'm sure this is a thing that stuck with him for the rest of his life. So really good memoir. I highly recommend.
I might eventually read it. I mean, you know me, it might be in 10 years, but good rec. Before we close out, how amazing was last week's episode?
It was really good. Man, it was so great. Just, yeah, I don't know. I was very excited for it to happen, and I'm so glad that everyone got to listen to it.
Isn't it nice when you have high expectations of stuff and it does not disappoint?
Yeah, absolutely.
Love that. I hope everyone else liked it too. Guys, let us know if you liked it. And I guess that's it for us this week. Thank you very much for listening. You can follow us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. Or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com. See you next week.
Bye.